January 10, 1941. Mediterranean Sea, 60 miles west of Malta. HMS Illustrious turned into the wind to recover aircraft. Her crew had just completed the most successful carrier strike in naval history, crippling 3 Italian battleships at Taranto 2 months earlier. Now German dive bombers were coming for revenge. 43 Junkers Ju-87 Stukas screamed down from 12,000 feet. The first bomb struck the armored flight deck at 3:47 in the afternoon, then another, and another. 6 direct hits in 6 minutes. Black smoke poured from the carrier. Fires raged below decks. The ship's list increased to 18 degrees. Admiral Cunningham watched from HMS Warship, certain Illustrious was finished. She wasn't finished. 3 hours later, Illustrious was making 17 knots toward Malta. Her flight deck, scarred and cratered, remained structurally intact. The 3-inch armored deck that naval architects worldwide had dismissed as excessive weight had just saved the ship. Every other carrier design in 1941 would have gone to the bottom. The British had built something different, and 6 German bombs had just proven why unconventional thinking wins wars. The vulnerability of aircraft carriers was obvious from the moment they joined the fleet. These vessels carried aviation fuel, bombs, torpedoes, and aircraft, all packed together on a thin steel hull. A single bomb penetrating to the hangar deck would find enough explosives and fuel to destroy the ship from within. Every Navy knew this. Most accepted it as the price of naval aviation. Carrier doctrine in 1939 prioritized aircraft capacity above all else. The United States Navy designed carriers with open hangar decks, wooden flight decks, and maximum aircraft stowage. The Japanese followed similar principles. Carrier striking power meant aircraft numbers. More planes meant more bombs delivered to enemy targets. Protection was secondary. The threat that worried carrier admirals most was the dive bomber. Level bombers rarely hit moving ships. Torpedoes required specific attack angles in sea states, but dive bombers, plunging nearly vertical from altitude, could put bombs directly onto flight decks with terrifying accuracy. German Stukas had proven this against land targets in Spain and Poland. The Ju-87 could place a 500-kilogram bomb within 10 meters of aim point from a dive that started above 10,000 feet. Against a carrier, a single penetrating hit could be catastrophic. Aviation fuel tanks were located below the hangar deck. Bomb magazines were nearby. Aircraft were parked with full fuel tanks and armed with torpedoes and bombs. One explosion could trigger a chain reaction that would gut the ship in minutes. The United States Navy war gamed this scenario repeatedly. Their conclusion was sobering. Carriers were inherently vulnerable. Accept the risk. Build more carriers to replace losses. The Royal Navy reached a different conclusion. British carriers operated in confined waters, the Mediterranean and North Sea, where land-based aircraft were a constant threat. British carriers couldn't retreat 3,000 miles across an ocean when threatened. They would fight within range of enemy air bases. They needed protection, not just striking power. The solution emerged from the Royal Corps of Naval Constructors in 1936. If carriers must operate under air attack, make the flight deck itself armored. Build the strength deck as the flight deck, not below it. Accept fewer aircraft. Accept reduced speed. Build a carrier that could survive what would sink its contemporaries. The Admiralty response was skeptical. Armoring the flight deck meant enormous weight high in the ship. This would reduce stability unless compensated by wider beam. Wider beam meant more displacement for the same speed. More displacement meant longer build time and higher cost. And for what? A carrier that embarked fewer aircraft than its American equivalents? The proponents argued from operational reality. A carrier sunk by a single bomb embarks 0 aircraft permanently. A carrier damaged but operational embarks reduced aircraft temporarily. The question wasn't maximum striking power. The question was sustained striking power under combat conditions. An armored carrier might carry fewer aircraft, but it would keep operating when conventional carriers burned. The Illustrious class design emerged from this debate. The ships would displace 23,000 tons standard, 28,619 tons full load. Length overall would be 743 feet 9 inches. Beam would be 95 feet 9 inches. Draft at full load would be 28 feet 10 inches. These were large carriers by 1939 standards, but the displacement bought protection. The flight deck armor was the defining feature. 3 inches of non-cemented armor across the entire flight deck area, 436 feet by 95 feet. This wasn't decorative plating. 3-inch armor could defeat a 500-kilogram bomb with impact velocity up to terminal velocity from 8,000 feet. The armor was integral to the ship's structure, the strength deck itself. Removing it would require rebuilding the entire ship. Below the armored flight deck, the hangar was a 458-foot-long armored box. The hangar sides were 4.5 inches of armor. The hangar deck was 3 inches of armor. The hangar ends were sealed with 2-inch armored doors. This created an armored citadel protecting the aircraft, fuel, and munitions from splinters, blast, and near misses. If bombs penetrated the flight deck, the armored hangar would contain the damage. The propulsion system used Parsons geared turbines driving 3 shafts. 6 Admiralty 3-drum boilers provided steam. Total horsepower was 111,000 shaft horsepower. This drove the ship to 30.5 knots at deep load, 31 knots light. Range was 11,000 miles at 14 knots, sufficient for Mediterranean operations and Atlantic deployments. The defensive armament reflected the ship's expected operating environment. When completed, Illustrious carried 16 4.5-inch dual-purpose guns in 8 twin mountings, 6 octuple 2-pounder pom-pom mountings, and 8.50 caliber machine guns. The 4.5-inch guns could engage aircraft or surface targets out to 20,000 yards. The pom-poms created a barrier at close range that would shred attacking aircraft. The price of armor was aircraft capacity. Illustrious was designed to operate 33 aircraft. American carriers of similar displacement embarked 70 to 80 aircraft. The Illustrious hangar could not be expanded without compromising the armored protection. British naval architects accepted this trade. 33 aircraft that could operate tomorrow were worth more than 70 aircraft that might not survive today. 4 ships of the Illustrious class were ordered. Illustrious herself was laid down at Vickers Armstrong Barrow on April 27, 1937. She was launched on April 5, 1939, just months before war began. She commissioned on May 25, 1940. Her first operational deployment would prove the design philosophy within months. If you're enjoying this analysis of British carrier design philosophy, consider subscribing. It helps the channel continue producing detailed technical and operational histories like this one. Illustrious joined the Mediterranean Fleet in August 1940. Her air group consisted of 15 Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers and 12 Fairey Fulmar fighters. This was a small air group, but Admiral Cunningham understood what he had. This carrier could operate close to enemy air bases. This carrier could survive attacks that would cripple conventional designs. The first operational test came on November 11, 1940. Operation Judgment, the attack on the Italian battle fleet at Taranto. Illustrious launched 21 Swordfish in 2 waves against 6 Italian battleships anchored in Taranto harbor. The Italians believed the harbor was protected by shallow water, 40 feet deep. Torpedoes didn't work in shallow water. The British modified their torpedoes. Breakaway heads that would run shallow. At 11:27 in the evening, the first Swordfish dropped torpedoes into Taranto harbor. By dawn, 3 Italian battleships sat on the harbor floor. Conte di Cavour, Caio Duilio, and Littorio, crippled in their anchorage. The balance of Mediterranean naval power shifted in one night. The Regia Marina never recovered. The success at Taranto made Illustrious a target. German air crews stationed in Sicily received explicit orders. Sink the British carrier. Cripple Mediterranean Fleet air power. Remove the threat to Axis convoys supplying North Africa. The Luftwaffe committed Flieger Corps X, dive bomber and torpedo bomber units transferred from Norway specifically to hunt Illustrious. January 10, 1941. Illustrious was escorting a convoy to Malta, designated Operation Excess. The convoy approached the Sicilian Channel within easy range of German air bases. Radar detected the first wave at 1,235 hours. 43 Ju-87 Stukas from 2 Stuka Gruppen, escorted by Messerschmitt 109 fighters. The Stukas split into sections and began their attack runs from 12,000 feet. The carrier's 4.5-inch guns opened fire at maximum elevation. Pom-poms created a curtain of fire at lower altitude. Illustrious turned hard, attempting to comb the attacks. The first bomb hit at 1,247 hours, striking the afterlift. The bomb penetrated the lift and detonated in the hangar. Fire erupted among parked aircraft. The second bomb hit seconds later, penetrating near the island's superstructure. The third bomb struck the rear of the flight deck, cratering the armored surface but not penetrating. Fourth, fifth, and sixth bombs followed within 3 minutes. The ship was hit 6 times by 500-kilogram bombs in a concentrated attack that would have destroyed any other carrier afloat. The armored flight deck held. Of 6 direct hits, only 2 penetrated to the hangar. The others cratered the armor or glanced off. This was exactly what the design intended. The bombs that penetrated caused severe damage, killing 126 crew and starting major fires. But the armored hangar contained the damage. The fires didn't spread to magazines. The aviation fuel tanks didn't explode. The ship remained afloat and under power. Illustrious made for Malta, listing 18 degrees but making 17 knots. She entered Grand Harbor at midnight under renewed German air attack. Bombs fell around the harbor, but none struck the damaged carrier. Over the next week, Illustrious was bombed repeatedly while in Malta's dockyard. She was hit by one additional bomb on January 16 during a raid by 70 aircraft. The ship survived. Emergency repairs in Malta took 9 days. On January 23, Illustrious departed Malta for Alexandria, then continued to Norfolk Navy Yard in the United States for complete repairs. She arrived in May 1941. American naval architects inspected the damage. Their conclusion was clear. The armored deck had saved the ship. An American carrier taking 6 direct hits would have sunk within an hour. The comparison with American carrier design philosophy became stark during the Pacific War. United States Navy carriers were built for maximum aircraft capacity. Essex-class carriers displaced 27,000 tons and embarked 90 to 100 aircraft. Their flight decks were wooden planking over thin steel plate. This saved weight and allowed larger air groups. Essex-class carriers were highly effective when they controlled the air and prevented attacks from reaching the fleet. When attacks penetrated, the results were catastrophic. USS Franklin was hit by 2 bombs in March 1945. The bombs penetrated the wooden flight deck, reached the hangar, and triggered explosions among armed and fueled aircraft. 807 crew died. The ship barely survived. USS Bunker Hill was hit by 2 kamikazes in May 1945. The aircraft penetrated the flight deck and exploded in the hangar. 393 crew died. Both ships were knocked out of the war. Illustrious returned to service in December 1941. She operated in the Indian Ocean, supporting the Madagascar invasion and providing fleet air defense. In 1943, she returned to the Mediterranean for the Salerno landings. In 1944, she joined the British Pacific Fleet. Operating with American carriers in 1945 showed the design differences clearly. On April 1, 1945, a kamikaze struck Illustrious on the flight deck. The aircraft exploded on impact. The armored deck was scorched but undamaged. The ship's aircraft were operating again within an hour. American carriers hit by kamikazes typically required weeks or months of repair. The British carriers with armored decks shrugged off damage that would cripple their American counterparts. The comparison with German carrier development is equally revealing. Germany never completed a fleet carrier. Graf Zeppelin was laid down in 1936 but never finished. Her design followed conventional doctrine with unarmored flight deck and maximum aircraft stowage. German naval architects saw no need for armored decks. German carriers would operate under Luftwaffe air cover. This proved to be wishful thinking, as Luftwaffe priorities rarely aligned with naval requirements. Japanese carrier design philosophy paralleled American thinking. Maximize aircraft capacity, accept vulnerability to achieve striking power. This worked brilliantly when Japanese carriers struck first at Pearl Harbor, Darwin, and Ceylon. It failed catastrophically when American aircraft reached Japanese carriers. At Midway, 4 Japanese fleet carriers were destroyed in one day by dive bombers that penetrated unarmored flight decks and started uncontrollable fires in open hangars. The strategic lesson was clear. Carrier survivability mattered as much as striking power. A carrier that survived today's battle could fight tomorrow. A carrier sunk because it lacked protection was useless regardless of its theoretical aircraft capacity. The British accepted reduced air groups to gain the protection that kept their carriers operational. Illustrious proved this through her war service. She survived 6 direct bomb hits that would have sunk any other carrier in 1941. She remained operational through 5 years of war in the most dangerous naval theaters. She was hit multiple times and always returned to service. Her armored flight deck was damaged repeatedly, but never penetrated catastrophically. The design philosophy worked. The final verdict on Illustrious-class carriers came from combat statistics. 4 ships of the class served through World War II. All 4 survived the war. They were hit by bombs, kamikazes, and near misses that would have destroyed conventional carriers. They absorbed damage, conducted emergency repairs, and returned to operations. Their smaller air groups were offset by their consistent availability. Compare this to American and Japanese carrier losses. The United States lost 4 fleet carriers during the war, plus numerous escort carriers. Japan lost all 10 of its pre-war fleet carriers, plus the carriers completed during the war. German and Italian carriers never became operational. British armored carriers survived when others didn't. The armor worked. The cost of this protection was real. Illustrious embarked fewer aircraft than her American contemporaries. Her striking power in any single engagement was reduced. But naval war is not won in single engagements. It is won through sustained operations over months and years. A carrier that survives and operates continuously provides more cumulative striking power than a carrier with larger air groups that gets sunk. British carrier doctrine understood this. The Royal Navy didn't need to win carrier duels in open ocean. They needed to maintain air cover for convoys, support amphibious operations, and strike enemy positions in confined waters. These missions required carriers that could operate close to enemy air bases and survive the inevitable attacks. Armored decks enabled this operational posture. Post-war carrier development validated the British approach. Modern supercarriers have armored flight decks as standard. The United States Navy adopted armored decks starting with the Midway class, completed after World War II. Every subsequent American carrier has incorporated flight deck armor. The vulnerability of wooden decks was proven too costly. British carrier designers in 1936 understood what others learned through combat losses. Illustrious served until 1955. She was the last British armored carrier to leave service. Her career spanned 15 years and proved that unconventional design choices, made for sound operational reasons, create vessels that perform when tested. The 3-inch armored deck that critics called excessive weight became the feature that saved the ship and validated British carrier doctrine. January 10, 1941. 6 German bombs struck HMS Illustrious. The ship that should have sunk according to conventional carrier doctrine instead made port under her own power and returned to fight for 4 more years. The armor that naval architects debated. In 1936 proved its worth in 1941. British carriers survived the war because British designers understood that protection enables sustained operations. This is why armored flight decks mattered. This is why unconventional thinking wins wars. This is why the carrier that refused to sink proved British naval superiority through engineering excellence validated under fire.